What's up guys, it's Scott here and welcome back to FudgeMuppet. Today I'm pumped to bring you the latest installment in our Skyrim Remastered build series. We've reimagined the backstory, overhauled the role-playing, and refined the perks for your gaming pleasure. This is the Bandit. The Bandit takes no prisoners. He waits in the brush beside the road as the unsuspecting traveller strolls down the trade path whistling in a jaunty tune. And then, as if out of nowhere, he strikes hard with his enormous battle axe, splitting the traveller in two and making off with all the loot he can carry. The Bandit is a relentless, heartless thief who will do any dastardly deeds that result in him making money or acquiring rare loot. Remember the good old days in Oblivion when those bandit highwaymen would try to take your coin on the road only for you to teach them a painful lesson? Well, this build is inspired by those fallen fools, only the Bandit isn't so easy to take down. The Bandit is a Khajiit. This feline has an ability called Night Eye which allows him to see in the dark for 60 seconds for an unlimited amount of times per day. Also, even though he will rarely resort to fisticuffs, the Bandit gains plus 15 points of damage to his unarmed attacks thanks to his claws. On top of this, his innate bonus of plus 5 to lockpicking and plus 10 to sneak will be massively helpful for his skill setup. The Bandit will use the Steed Stone early on to make his armor weightless and it'll make room for lots of loot, but once the conditioning perk is undertaken, it won't be as viable, so that's when you should switch it up and get the one and only Atronach Stone. Gotta counter those mages somehow. The 50% spell absorption provides great protection, but for those of you who are a bit over this particular stone, the Steed Stone's 100 extra carry weight may be enough to stop you from making the switch. The choice is all yours. The Bandit's stat spread will be 80% health to stay alive, especially considering his armor isn't the best, and 20% stamina for sneak rolls, sprinting and sprinting power attacks. The Bandit was born in the forests of the Heartlands in Cyrodiil. As a Khajiit, the nomadic lifestyle was nothing new, and growing up, the Bandit got used to the constant changes in scenery. What was difficult to live with, however, was his parents' drug addictions. They were unable to provide for themselves, as what little coin they could acquire was spent on moon sugar, and if they were lucky, a few hits of skooma. This continued throughout the Bandit's childhood until the sickly sweet fruity aroma of the drug began to disgust him. The numb state it left them in meant they were never responsive to the young Bandit who craved nurture and attention. By no surprise, one particularly sketchy batch of skooma took its toll on the Bandit's mother. Her voice disappeared and she was pulled into a violent fit. Throughout his life, the Bandit would never forget the fleeting moment the violent convulsions switched to absolute stillness. The moment the life left her inebriated body. That moment was the first time the Bandit saw his father completely sober. The realization hit him harder than any drug could have. During these events, the Bandit sat alone, staring, swaying back and forth. But rather than fulfilling his paternal duties to his son, his father left, abandoning them both. That night was the longest of the young Bandit's life. The Bandit sat unmoving until dawn, prompted to move only by his mortal necessity for hydration. Most would write this lone child off as being bound to an early grave, but the Bandit was used to providing for himself. At least now whatever he found wasn't exchanged for narcotics. As children in circumstances like these do, the Bandit turned to the life of a highwayman. He fashioned weapons from sharpened sticks and stones and preyed upon traveling merchants who were unwise enough to travel without protection. He was successful enough. It only took one kill to provide him with enough items to live off for a month. And while he wasn't an expert killer or thief, he learned the importance of the element of surprise. Hiding in the brush at the point where the road merges with the forest was all it took. His victims didn't have a chance to outmuscle the Khajiit youth. One day in his early teens, the Bandit was struck by irony, and he was ambushed by a group of highwaymen just like him. Realizing he had no earthly possessions or a family to miss him, they spared his life, instead electing to recruit him to their posse. There was 3 of them. One of them was a large, dark-skinned red guard named Dozim. The only thing bigger than his heavily muscled frame was his hatred for the wealthy. The next was a wily wood elf named Nedrin, who had obviously abandoned the Green Pact after enough close encounters with starvation. And the last was an Argonian named Kista, who scarcely said one word to the Bandit. All she did was stare with her luminous reptilian eyes. They were all considerably older than the Bandit, but he hit it off with Dozim, who had started teaching him how to swing a sword. As unconventional as it was, he felt like he was part of a team now. In order to build up his strength and contribute with setting up camp, the Bandit was put in charge of chopping wood. He brought the woodcutting axe down so many times over the years that he grew to be the second largest of the band. Puberty may have also played a part in that process, however. These highwaymen were far more ambitious than the Bandit had ever been on his own. Nedrin often scouted outside of surrounding cities and villages to hear word of trading caravans that were scheduled to come and go. The bandits' first raid was a small caravan of 5 or so merchants traversing from Bruma to Shadenhall. They waited patiently in the woodland north of the Blue Road. By the time the caravan made it this close to their destination, they would be exhausted, so focused on arriving that they may just let their guard down. After several days of preparation, the caravan appeared on the dusk horizon. Dazim and the bandit put away their whetstones and readied their blades, while Nedrin and Kizda slipped across the road to take up position on the other side. When the 3-carriage caravan entered their domain, Nedrin engaged by firing an arrow at the leading guardsman, and then they erupted from the trees with weapons in hand, slaughtering the merchants and caravan guards before they could unsheath their weapons. The haul was a good one, well worth the several-day wait and resources spent scouting. They salvaged rations of food, silk to be sold elsewhere, and the bandits noticed a heavy steel battle axe slung to the back of one of the dead guards. Dozim had his eyes on it too, but he signaled for the bandit to take it, a token for a successful job. With his lumberjack physique and the guidance of Dozim, the bandit mastered the 2-handed battle axe easily. While the two of them trained, he noticed that Nedrin and Kizda were working on something big. A huge caravan was going to be leaving the Imperial City headed for Skyrim in a few days, carrying enough valuable arms and armor to supply an entire army. The group headed northeast to begin preparations for their biggest heist ever. When that day came, the bandit was a mess of nerves. The procession was rumored to be 5 times that of the last. They would need to be stealthy to take down the guards from the rear carriage onwards without alerting the entire caravan. They waited patiently in the brush, watching the caravan pass them. They let the carriage get just ahead of them, and then Kizda emerged from the undergrowth, closely trailed by Nedrin. Dazim and the bandit followed a few strides behind, focusing more on preventing their heavy boots from making noise than anything else. Kizda slits the throat of the rear guards without so much as a whisper. She covered each of their mouths as she slowly lowered them to the muddy ground. The 4 highwaymen circled around the next carriage, but just as they passed it, the curtained window of the carriage opened, and out popped a noblewoman's head, clearly the wife of one of the merchants. Before any of them could react, she screamed. Kizda thrust a blade down the woman's throat, cutting off the scream as it turned into a gurgle of blood. The guards all came at once, and the highwaymen stood and fought. Dazim mowed down 2 guards with one swing of his greatsword, opening some space around him. Nedrin knocked an arrow. He had never trusted his dagger as much as he did his bow, but he was too close, and the guard he was aiming at closed the distance, slapping the bow from Nedrin's hand and propelling his sword through Nedrin's chest. Kizda pounced on the guard's back, shrieking in a foreign tongue, and she stabbed him in the chest repeatedly, filling the guard with crimson holes from gut to neck. That was one of the few times the bandit ever heard her speak. In that moment, when her composure was lost, the next guard brought her down with his sword. The punctured guard and Kizda slumped off the ground together, and then it was just the bandit and Dozim. They fought off the remaining guards, barely surviving the encounter. All of them were dead. Dazim dropped and leaned up against the spokes of one of the carriage's wheels. Dazim wanted to take the loot and give up the criminal life, but this was all the bandit knew. He could never adjust to the quiet life. The next morning, the two embraced and they went their separate ways, with as much gold as he could carry and the battle axe slung across his back. The bandit headed north. Maybe up there he'll be able to plunder while the province of Skyrim was too busy dealing with a civil war. Whether by coincidence or karma, the bandit was caught on the border and carted off to Helgen. After escaping the block, the bandit will go where the wind takes him, aiming to recuperate some of his lost wealth. He will end up in Falkreath early on, stealing petty items from the tavern, the smith, and any other establishment or home with anything worth stealing inside. To avoid rousing suspicion among the guards and the townsfolk, he will offer to help find the town's lost dog. After locating Barbas, he will meet Clavicus Vile. From there, he will be tempted by the rueful axe, leading him to kill Barbas. He won't feel any remorse, of course, as he has no issue killing anyone at all. From here, the province of Skyrim is his oyster. He will travel the area, ambushing traveling merchants, mercenaries, guards, Thalmor representatives, anyone who has anything remotely valuable in their possession. Stealing is the aim of the game. Anything he does steal, he will sell when he reaches the cities, including illicit drugs like skooma. Though he will never use skooma, of course. He'll take on any quests that offer good pay or good reward, regardless of the morality. As for factions, he will complete the main story in the Dragonborn DLC so he can take advantage of Dragonborn abilities when striking unsuspecting foes on the road. He'll obviously join the Thieves Guild to learn all the tricks of the trade. He could potentially join the Dark Brotherhood depending on how deep down the evil rabbit hole you want to take him, and he could join the Companions and the Dawn Guard for any potential valuables he could pocket along the way. With his backstory, role-playing, and factions sorted, let's see how exactly that'll affect the Bandit's skills, spells, perks, and playstyle. The primary skills for this build are two-handed heavy armor smithing, sneak, and lockpicking. The Bandit didn't see many mages in his time living in the wilderness. He prefers to take a much more direct approach when he kills his foes. And by direct approach, I mean arcing a swing of his axe that chops them in half like firewood. With that said, here are the Bandit's essential perks. Thanks to Dazim's guidance and the need for fresh firewood in the cold Heartland evenings, the Bandit swings an axe with immense power and accuracy. His axe of choice is the two-handed battle axe. From the two-handed skill tree, you'll want to take the middle branch up to sweep, taking both great critical charge and devastating blow along the way. Great critical charge is one we usually skip as it doesn't add much damage, but for the Bandit's playstyle, it fits perfectly. It allows you to perform a two-handed power attack while sprinting that does double critical damage. For a charging in ambushing playstyle, you can't go wrong with this. Next up, we have heavy armor. The Bandit is a powerful presence, and while sneaking is his forte, when it comes to actual conflict, he abandons stealth to demolish his opponents in a loud and unsubtle fashion. As a result, heavy armor is definitely the preferred armor choice. From this skill tree, we suggest taking the entire left branch. Conditioning is the important perk here as it removes weight from heavy armor pieces and stops them from slowing you down. This means the Bandit can sneak around and get into any position he wants without being impeded by bulky, clunky plates of iron. The next skill only requires 2 points of investment, so you won't be breaking the bank with your perk points here. From the smithing skill tree, you ought to take steel smithing and arcane blacksmith. That's all you need to keep the Bandit's enchanted weapon and simple heavy armor well maintained. Even an uneducated criminal could figure out how to smith to that level. The Bandit has made a career from sleuthing around the trees and peeping out of the brush until his victims are in sight, so it's no surprise that the Bandit is a master of the sneak skill. From this tree, we recommend that you take everything on the left-hand side. The 3 perks on the right focus on sneak attacks, and as we mentioned, the Bandit ditches sneakiness pretty quickly when he comes running in with his axe. Notable perks here include muffled movement, which removes 50% of heavy armor noise, and silence, which stops walking and running from affecting detection. With these perks, the Bandit can hypothetically close a huge amount of distance on his prey before they even see him coming. Lastly but not leastly, we have lockpicking. We've left out pickpocket as the Bandit will generally be taking loot from people he has already killed. I doubt a dead guy is going to notice you rifling around in his pockets regardless of your legerdemain skills. With lockpicking, however, the Bandit can get into any lockboxes, houses, or hidden rooms that may be stowing valuable goodies. From this skill tree, you'll want to pick everything except for quick hands, master locks, and wax key. Unbreakable is always a good choice as it prevents lockpicks from breaking and takes the risk out of failing difficult locks. The 2 main attractions from this tree are Golden Touch and Treasure Hunter. With these, you'll have a much better chance of finding septums and special items when rummaging around in chests. The Bandit's playstyle is pretty straightforward. He is a hybrid of a stealth build and a tanky high damage build. You'll sneak around, avoiding raising suspicion from the guards, and get into prime position before running out of cover and ambushing your foes with your massive axe. It's more about the ambush than the sneak attack. Outside of battle, you'll use the same stealth abilities to cheat and steal, opting to kill your targets rather than pickpocket them. As for gear, the Bandit will wear banded iron armor, iron boots, and iron gauntlets, all smithed up. As mentioned before, his weapon of choice will be the Daedric artifact, the Rueful Axe. This should be smithed up with the arcane blacksmith perk. Subscribe to FudgeMuppet for more badass builds just like this one, and give the video a like if you enjoyed it. But that concludes this week's Skyrim Remastered build, The Bandit. In the description you can find links of all our social media accounts, and there you can keep up with us and interact with us about all things Elder Scrolls and Fallout. Also in the description are timestamps to help you navigate throughout the video, so if you want to go back and check a section, you can. Don't forget to vote for which build we remaster next in the comments. Your choices this week will be the Partru and the Count. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I've been Mike. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I've been Scott, and I look forward to nerding out with you again next time.